The storm tore through the frozen northern wastes like a savage beast, whipped into a frenzy by bitter winds that sliced through the thickest firs and cracked the hardest stone. Snowflakes, sharp as slivers of glass, bit at exposed skin, and the world had narrowed down to a breathless, blinding white chaos. Amid this frozen tempest, Iria stumbled forward, her breath ragged and shallow, her body aching with cold and exhaustion. Her boots slipped on the ice beneath the unyielding blanket of snow, her thin cloak clinging desperately to her slender frame, soaking wet and nearly frozen stiff. The faint scar on her left cheek burned fiercely, a cruel reminder that no matter how far she fled, the past clawed at her. She was a cast-out woman now, accused of treason, betrayed by those who should have protected her. The quiet, steady life she once knew as a waitress in a small village was crushed beneath the weight of lies and suspicion, and here she was, pushed into exile, into the heart of the frozen north, where few dared to cross. Her limbs trembled, not only from cold, but from the absence of hope, yet still some ember of defiance burned inside her, a spark she would not let die, no matter how dark the night. Before her loomed the Alpha King's fortress, a towering monolith of grey stone carved out of the mountain itself. The wild gales twisted around its battlements like frost-bitten serpents, wind howling through arrow slits and battlements, as if mourning the unwelcome visitor who dared intrude upon this cold, ordered domain. She had heard whispers of this place, the seat of Kavin, the Alpha King, ruthless, unyielding, and as cold as the glaciers that surrounded his kingdom. Yet here she was, a prisoner, delivered by storm and circumstance, a mere shadow cast in the iron grip of a king and his wolves. The massive gate creaked open against the wind's fury, and 2 sentries in heavy furs and steel stared down from their perch, eyes sharp with suspicion. "Bring her inside," one grunted. "She's the traitor." Iria's heart hammered, but she met their gaze with unflinching grey eyes brimming with a stubborn flame. "I am no traitor," she said softly, frost forming on her lashes. "There is a truth you refuse to see." The guards didn't reply, merely nodding to one another as the blizzard pummeled at their backs. They dragged her across the threshold and into the cavernous cold, smelling of stone and iron and the faint musk of wolves. Iria's breath caught as the great wooden doors slammed behind her, sealing her from the storm and from the life she once had. She was a prisoner now, trapped inside Kavin's frozen court. Deep inside the fortress, shadowed eyes watched her arrival. Kavin stood tall and powerful, the very air around him charged with an almost primal force. His thick, jet-black hair curled slightly against the cold stone walls, framing the angular jaw and the faint, shadowed stubble that deepened the hard lines of a face carved by both rule and relentless survival. His amber eyes glowing like molten gold beneath thick lashes tracked her every movement, guarded and unyielding. There was something brittle beneath his cold gaze, a tension that whispered of storms beneath a still surface. His beast stirred uneasily beside him, a massive grey wolf whose yellow eyes glinted with a warning glow. The pack had been silent at dawn, unsettled by her arrival. A ripple of disquiet passed through the fortress, like a shiver down a spine of ice. Taven's jaw clenched. He had birthed his kingdom from cold stone and steel, forged through discipline and dominance. Yet this woman, this broken exile, threatened that perfect equilibrium. Against the howling wind, she was an anomaly, wild, defiant, alive. "I will not break," she said, voice low but steady as the wolf growled softly behind Kavin. "You may hold me here, but my spirit refuses your chains." Kavin's eyes narrowed, not in contempt, but in calculation. There was a fire inside those grey eyes she could not snuff out, and that spark intrigued him more than he liked to admit. "Defiance is a luxury you cannot afford," he said evenly, voice like gravel raked over ice. "Here, you will learn your place." She met that challenge without flinching. Even as the heavy guards locked the cell door behind her, and a distant howl of wolves echoed through the stone halls, a reminder that the pack was always watching, always judging. The stone chamber where Iria was confined was damp and cold, its shadow swallowing what little warmth she had carried within her. Low ceilings pressed down, walls rough-hewn and grey, damp air thick with the scent of moss and wet earth. But beneath the chamber, in a hidden alcove dimly lit by flickering torches, lay a different kind of sanctuary, wounded wolves, their breathing ragged, their fur matted with blood and grime. Iria knelt beside the largest of them, her slender fingers trembling just enough to betray her fear, despite the steady calm she forced into her voice. "Easy, old friend," she whispered, leaning close to the creature whose amber eyes, pain-filled but trusting, met hers. She moved with care, unravelling torn fur, applying salves, mixed from herbs she had scavenged along the frozen edge. The wolves, warriors of the pack, trembled under the weight of their injuries, and something more intangible, a deep, restless unease that mirrored Caven's own. It had been days since the pack had been this unsettled, the silence oppressive and thick. Their growls were softer now, whispers that rippled through the rock like fragile secrets. Iria's touch was gentle, a balm not only for old wounds, but for fears too deep to speak aloud. As her hands worked, her voice lowered to a soothing murmur, half prayer, half song. Her breath warmed the harsh air, and for a moment the frozen walls seemed less forbidding, the cold receding like a distant tide. One wolf, smaller and younger, whimpered softly as Iria traced a careful line along a fresh tear in its flank. The animal's eyes flicked to hers with a flicker of hesitant hope, a fragile trust sparked by kindness. Iria felt a pang deep in her chest, a longing for a life before betrayal, before exile. Still, despite the pain that clung to her own bones, a fierce guardianship blossomed in her heart. These wolves alone in his kingdom, forgotten and wounded, were her only allies in this cage of ice. She could feel eyes watching her from the darkened corners of the chamber, too quiet to be soldiers or servants. And there he was, Caven, stepped silently into the shadows, where the stone met shadowed stone. His presence was immediate and overwhelming, broad, unyielding, a mountain carved from flesh and willpower. His amber gaze followed her every motion as the wolf beside him let loose a low rumble, more a question than a threat. "You heal them," Caven said finally, his voice rough around the edges yet laced with an unexpected reverence. Iria's head flicked toward him, her grey eyes narrowing just slightly. "I do what I must." "They are part of your pack, are they not?" He remained silent a moment before replying, his gaze drifting to the nearest wolf, then back to her. "They are the backbone of my kingdom, the eyes and teeth of my power, and they are wounded because of the threat you carry." She blinked at that, the weight behind his words digging deeper than she expected. Threat. A word that carried more than political ambition, it carried fear, a recognition of power hidden behind fragile flesh. "I carry no threat you cannot contain," Iria said, her voice steady but raw under the steel edge. "And yet your pack senses what you refuse to see." Warning, sound that twined with the tension hanging thick in the air. "You talk as if you own this land, or rule over fear itself." "I own nothing," Iria whispered, "except the truth. And no fortress, built of stone or steel, can imprison that forever." They stood there, king and exile, predator and prey, caught in a silent standoff, that crackled with volatile energy. Neither would speak again for a moment, each reading the other like an open wound beneath the snow. Beneath the cold stone they stood upon, the wolves settled slowly, their breathing easing as Iria's quiet ministrations wove a soft thread of calm. Caven's hand twitched, a rare show of doubt in the fortress he ruled with iron certainty. His beast grumbled low, shifting at the precipice of obedience and rebellion. "You are a puzzle I did not expect," he finally admitted, voice low, barely more than a growl. "And that unsettles me." Iria allowed herself a brief, bitter smile. Eyes cold, yet not unkind. "Good," she said quietly. "You should never be too comfortable in your throne." As the firelight danced across walls slick with frost, the pack's unrest began to lessen. The wolves, silent at dawn, seemed to listen too, their ancient senses stirring with the recognition of a presence that could bring either ruin or redemption. Between Iria and Caven, a fragile truce took root, thin yet unbreakable as ice on a winter's pond. The storm raged outside still, and beyond the fortress walls the wolves howled into the night, tentative calls that felt like the fragile first notes of a song neither of them knew how to sing. But in the silent exchanges, the veiled glances, and the careful touches between a fallen woman and an ice king, something had begun, the slow unraveling and perhaps the rebirth of power, trust, and the unheard howl of a frozen heart waking. The cold wind whispered secrets through the castle's stone corridors, a chill that cut even deeper than the northern frost biting outside. Iria pressed herself against the thick wall near the servants' quarters, every muscle taut, her breath steady but shallow. The candlelight from the flickering sconces barely touched the shadows where she lurked, but it was enough for her ears, sharp and hungry, to catch the words drifting through the silence like poisoned threads. Scandalous, Queen's wrath, whispers that will bring ruin. But something far more jagged ran along her spine as she caught the fragments of hushed voices curling around the corner. Two servants, their faces tight with fear and urgency, conversed in tones hushed enough to be mistaken for the crackle of the fireplace. "Does no one speak of the Alpha King's betrayal?" The way Lady Alira shattered before he cast her away like broken ice. One voice murmured, thick with gossip, and Caven's arrogance, sleeping with the southern envoy, while the Queen's heart broke without a sound. "The court silence is kin to deceit now," the other voice hissed, bitterness souring the words. Aria's hands clenched into fists at her sides. The truth, so deeply buried beneath slights and shadows, now hovered in the open air, a grotesque spectre she wasn't meant to see. Caven's secret affairs, a queen spurned, the court roiling beneath the surface of cold civility. She was no stranger to betrayal, but this was a blade twisting with unfamiliar cruelty. The stories of her own exile paled beside a man who feigned strength while his kingdom fractured behind his back. Worse, the whispers suggested, she had been nothing more than a pawn, yet another betrayal to endure in a tale that never belonged to her. The faint scar on her left cheek itched as if the cold had seeped beneath her skin, urging her to move, but she stayed, eavesdropping, until the echo of footsteps drew the servants away. Alone once more, the weight of rejection settled heavy in the room, a thick fog that wrapped her in isolation. She was unwanted, a marionette abandoned after a cruel performance. The humiliation threatened to unravel her, but something deep within defied the rubble of shame. Her breathing slowed deliberately, eyes closing to the black behind her eyelids, seeking from the depths, not despair, but strength. The frozen north had not broken her, it had only awakened something dormant, a power born, not of warmth and light, but of ice and resilience. She became aware of the subtle change first in the breath of the air, how it sharpened and gleamed with cold energy. Her skin tingled alive beneath the rough wool cloak. Her fingers twitched as if the frost whispered spells only her fingers could read. The scar across her cheek, once a mark of her fall, now pulsed softly, a faint, silvery glow tracing its line. Iria lifted her hand and exhaled, watching tiny shimmering flakes dance and swirl in the air like restless spirits summoned from the snow outside. The frost obeyed her will. The cold was no longer an enemy, but an ally. It caressed her skin and strengthened her heartbeat, weaving a steady rhythm beneath the storm. She focused, a slow coil of power uncoiling from the roots of her shattered past. With a patience seductive in its lethality, the ice seeped into her veins, sharpening her senses and stilling the turmoil that threatened to drown her. Her mind snapped into focus, images flickering too quick to catch fragments of memory, of rage, of icy clarity, solidifying into determination. "Survival," she whispered, voice raw and brittle as the winter air itself. "I will take what I am owed." Pain and humiliation were the first lessons. Strength would be her next. Iria's gaze hardened as the frost within whispered of power tangled with the cold, that she might forge herself anew from something unyielding and fierce. The pack around her stirred uneasily again, the air electric with tensions not yet understood. Her resilience would surprise them all, even herself. Asterisk. The throne room loomed, vast and cold the next evening, the great chamber suffused with shadows and the subtle scent of pine burning on the hearth. Iria stood near the entrance, arms folded loosely, but with a ring of steel beneath the poise. The heavy carved doors had been closed behind her, their deep thuds a heartbeat of finality. Caven sat on his throne, carved from ironwood and wrapped with wolf pelts, a king encased in ice and steel. His amber eyes caught her at once, dark and unreadable, yet betraying a flicker of the tension spiraling between them like the storm outside. "You should not be here," he said, voice cold but not unkind. There was a weight behind his words, the unspoken protest of a man unprepared for the challenge this woman now posed. "I am here because you need to hear the truth," Iria said, her voice steady, unwavering, "because I will not stand silent while lies shape the fate of your pack and your kingdom." His brows knit, the mask of the unyielding alpha faltering. The wolves around the chamber shifted in a low murmur, sensing the fracture in their leader's stoicism. The air was thick with silent demands and ironclad pride. "You accuse me of betrayal?" Caven's tone rang harsh, but his eyes searched hers with a reluctant curiosity edged with old wounds. "I never betrayed the kingdom," she said, stepping closer, the firelight casting fragments of golden shadow across her face. "I was cast out, blamed, and discarded to save your throne, your image. I carry no stain of treason, only the scars left by those who feared a woman who might see beyond their lies." The pack's restlessness grew, a ripple of unease as the Alpha King's usual imperative stillness cracked. At the edge of the throne room, low growls threaded through the murmurs of the wolves, uncertain, impatient, but never reckless. Iria's gaze did not falter beneath his, her posture an unwavering pillar rooted in defiance and truth. "Look at me, Caven. Not as a pawn, not a prisoner, but as the woman you feared would change the tide." Caven's jaw clenched, a slow shift in his stance that resonated through the room. His voice was a whisper now, a rare vulnerability, threaded with slow-burning fire. "And why should I believe you? After all that's been said, all that you've allowed me to believe?" "Because desperation is not born of lies," she replied evenly. "Because when the wolves fall silent at dawn, the truth howls in the cold morning air." "I offer you no pleas," no false confessions. Only my certainty, the certainty that I survived your winter, and now I stand here unbroken." The king's eyes held hers longer, amber shadows flickering with the awareness of something shifting beneath the surface of power. Caven's pack stirred restlessly again, the alpha's gaze flickering to the beasts before returning to her, for the first time unveiling cracks in his mask. "Prove your worth, then," Caven said, "not with words, but with the strength you claim to hold beneath that fragile ice." Her lips curved slightly, a faint spark of something like hope or challenge. "Watch closely, Caven. I am done hiding beneath shadows." As the wind moaned mournfully beyond the stone walls and the fires sputtered low, the fragile truce between them stretched taut, threading through wounds old and new. In that cold vaulted chamber, two forces collided: the Alpha King, who ruled with an iron will, and the woman forged by exile and ice, awakening like the silent wolves beneath the dawn. Caven's voice lingered in the hollow silence of the chamber, long after his final words, the weight of command settling like frost on the edges of her bones. "You will remain by my side." Those words were not a request, nor an offer. They were an order, cold and absolute in their clarity, leaving no flicker of choice. The political thunders rumbling beyond the fortress, whispers of rebellion, treachery sown deep in the veins of the kingdom, left no room for leniency. Iria was not simply a prisoner anymore. She was a weapon, a shield, an enigma. Caven had not yet fully grasped, but was unwilling to release. Each morning, the chill seeped into the stone, curling around her ribs like tendrils of ice. She dressed in the muted greys and blacks that mirrored the fortress walls, but her presence was like a fault line through the rigid order of Caven's court, a fracture in the fortress of his will. Despite the severity of her sentence, she was allowed near him. The closeness was a tangled thread of necessity and scrutiny, threaded thoroughly with unspoken tension. Caven ruled with a precision born from decades of battle and betrayal. Every gesture he made was calculated, every word an unyielding command. Yet, in this evolving routine of near proximity, the rigid armor of their interactions began to loosen in imperceptible increments. It was a dance of shifting shadows, where each silent glance or brief touch carried the weight of restrained desire and wary respect. The wolves, ever watchful, prowled like ancient sentinels in the dark corners of the courtyard and halls. Their deep amber eyes flickered when Iria passed, a mix of caution and curiosity that mirrored their alpha's own conflicted gaze. At first, they stiffened in her presence, their snarls suppressed but unhidden, a clear warning to her, the newfound element among them. But time, that relentless thief and healer, revealed a different truth. The beasts, with their uncanny instinct, sensed the slumbering power beneath Iria's composed exterior, and though their growls diminished to restrained murmurs, the pack's acceptance grew subtle, like new ice settling gently over the depths below. Caven met her gaze across gatherings of advisors, his expression stoic, but his eyes betraying flickers of reluctant fascination. "Stay close," he silently ordered, through a sharp, almost imperceptible nod when their paths converged in the great hall or narrow corridors. The words were unspoken but heavy between them, binding her to his side as they faced the storm unleashed upon their lands. Evenings dragged longer, drawn taut with the weight of unvoiced fears and strategies. At times, Caven would let his voice drop low, commanding her to relay messages whispered in tight circles of silence, testaments to the grudging trust gestating between them. His amber eyes waited on her, seeking a recognition beyond the obvious, trying to untangle the mysteries she guarded beneath the frost-lined veil. "Why do you linger in the shadows when the pack is restless?" Caven's voice broke through one such evening, the rough edge of wariness coating his words. Her reply was steady, fulfilling her vow not to show weakness. Because I sense the wolves shifting, the balance unsettles. The unrest is not just in flesh, but spirit. He regarded her, a flicker of both challenge and respect sparking deep in that gaze. The wolves gave a low rumble at the edges of the courtyard, just beyond the open windows, shadows uncoiling and gathering strength beneath the waning moonlight. Caeven's jaw tightened, but he nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the truth she wore in her bones. Slowly, the barriers between them began to crack, not entirely, not yet, but enough that when their eyes met quietly in passing, the silence seemed charged with questions neither dared voice aloud. She noticed the imperceptible relaxation of his stance when she slid closer during council meetings, the way his broad frame shifted unconsciously at her nearness, and the subtle, cautioned warmth in his amber gaze. It was a fragile thing, this budding connection, born amid the unforgiving cold and mutual wariness. Iria's mind often wandered to the wolf pack, the way their massive bodies exuded raw power, their primal awareness something she both envied and feared. There was comfort in their presence, a mirror of the strength within her she'd barely begun to trust. Yet, with Caeven, there was something infinitely more complicated, a tempest of control and surrender, pain and hope, that stirred beneath his impenetrable facade. Ixteriskst, apteriskst, axteriskst. Night fell across the fortress like a veil spun from the deepest shadows, the cold sharpened by the unforgiving freeze biting out through cracks in the stone walls. The distant howling of wolves echoed faintly, a mournful hymn to the creeping dread that gnawed at the edges of Caeven's stronghold. The political unrest had grown into a storm, and now it burst with violent fury. The piercing wail of alarm shattered the fragile calm. Flames licked hungrily at the wooden outer wall, thick smoke swirling toward the shrouded heavens like black serpents. Screams mingled with the harsh clang of steel, frantic steps pounding against frozen earth. Iria's breath caught, her heart striking a frantic rhythm as she found Caeven immediately, his visage stony, but his eyes sharp as blades. "Get to safety," his voice ordered, but there was urgency beneath the cold command. "We'll hold the inner keep." Yet, even as he spoke, the fire crept closer, swallowing entire battlements, and the enemy forces pressed against them with relentless fury. Iria's mind seized the contours of danger with instinctive clarity. The pack, trained to protect their alpha, surged forward, but this attack was different, forced, desperate, designed to tear them apart within their own walls. Caeven's hand closed over hers, a rare gesture of possession and protection that stole the breath from her lungs. "With me now!" They fought a path through smoke and chaos, bodies blurring like wraiths in the oppressive heat. The wolves fell into formation around them, amber eyes gleaming with fierce loyalty, snarling down threats that dared approach. Yet even the pack's courage faltered before the overwhelming tide of invaders. The fortress was no longer a sanctuary, but a cage set ablaze, and escape was their only chance. Bursting through a hidden sally port, the frozen wilderness greeted them with a cruel, biting silence that spoke of death as surely as the fire did within their walls. The night sky stretched endless above, an unforgiving expanse of stars, cold and indifferent. Caeven's grip tightened, pulling her close against the chill. "Stay close, Aria!" This wasteland does not forgive. Her pulse thrummed in resonance with his, their breaths mingling, frost crystallizing on their skin as they plunged into the abyss of the frozen north. The biting wind clawed at their faces, whipping through the barren trees stripped by winter's merciless hand. Steps sunk deep into powdery snow that threatened to consume them whole. The silence was punctuated only by distant howls, wolves calling across the void, and the uneven thud of their own boots. But then something shifted within Iria. A low hum rose beneath her skin. Her fingers tingled with a dizzying blend of cold and heat, and the frost beneath her feet shimmered. Before Caven's astonished eyes, the snow twisted and churned, forming into a protective barrier of ice that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. The wolves around them growled in surprise, their hackles rising as the air thickened with raw elemental power. Caven froze, amber gaze wide, his hand instinctively drawing a blade from his belt. His wolf, massive and imposing, shifted at his side, muscles taut and eyes fixed warily on the swirling energy before them. Iria's breath hitched as she tapped deeper into the force within her, the power long denied, buried beneath layers of fear and exile, now surging with fierce defiance. The ice around them hardened into a shield, deflecting the icy blast of an arrow that came hurtling through the trees. "By the gods," Caven whispered, voice laced with awe and disbelief. "What are you?" She met his gaze, unflinching though her heart thundered with exposure. "I am more than the exile you cast aside, and more than the shadow you feared. I am a force beneath your kingdom's winter." The wolves circling them fell silent, as if recognizing the shift, their primal sense tottering between reverence and caution. Caven's jaw clenched, the vulnerability of his awe, a crack in his stern exterior that no enemy could breach, only the woman who held the ice with steady hands. Together they moved through the wilderness, the sudden alliance of their strength, a roaring current pulling them beyond the edge of destruction. The bitter wind no longer felt like a threat, but a fierce anthem to their survival, weaving together the raw force of wolf and human, alpha and exile, fire and ice. Eventually they reached a hollow where the trees wove a protective embrace. The snow softened beneath a canopy thick and dark. Caven lowered her carefully from the shielded ground. Their breaths mingled in the frigid air, cheeks flushed rose against the cold. "No words for this," he murmured, voice guttural and low, threading through the stillness. "You saved us both." Iria looked at him. The distance between them narrowed until it ceased to exist. The spark that had kindled in their looks, fostered in the quiet corridors and silenced by bitter winds, now roared openly, raw and unguarded. "The ice within me was never meant to destroy," she breathed, "but to protect, even when all else seemed lost." Caven's rough hands cupped her face, fingers tracing the faint scar she bore. A testament to pain survived. His amber eyes held a tumult of conflicting emotions, admiration, a flicker of longing, and something fragile that whispered of trust reborn. "Aya," he said, voice rough with the weight of unspoken promises, "what we face ahead will test more than our bodies." Her reply was a steady pulse of certainty, the echo of her survival and newfound strength. "Then we face it together." Beneath the frozen sky, their fates intertwined irrevocably, the first true thaw settling deep within the hearts of wolf and woman alike. The wilderness around them fell quiet once more, bearing witness to a bond forged not only in blood and battle, but in the fierce, unyielding fire of trust. The fortress loomed like a jagged crown of ice and stone against the bruise-colored horizon, as whispers began to stir within its great walls, whispers as sharp and cold as the northern wind. Barely a day had passed since Caven had cradled her beneath the shadowed trees, yet already murmurings wrapped through the guards' quarters, the council chambers, even the quiet courtyards. Iria's true lineage, the tale of a bloodline hidden beneath layers of treachery and myth, was unraveling like a thread pulled taut. The ancient stories whispered of a queen lost to time and treason, a queen whose bloodline was eradicated before history had even finished telling her name. Iria, once the Waitress cast out and labelled a foe, was now being called something far more dangerous, the rightful heir. In the torchlit hallways, eyes that once avoided her now narrowed with suspicion and greed. Those who had accepted her as a mere shadow in Caven's court now recoiled or plotted in secret. "She wears the scar of the fallen queen," one steward whispered, voice thick with jealousy. "If she claims that right, then our fates are undone." Betrayal took root in unexpected corners, a poison complicated by fear and envy. Nobody expected that Caven's most trusted lieutenant, Rallin, would be the first to question the Alpha's choice. The man's loyalty had always seemed unquestionable, steady as the mountains that girded the fortress. But when shadows of Iria's rising power darkened Caven's reign, Rallin's allegiance wavered, his glances sharpened by doubt and hunger for power. "She's a flame that burns too bright," Rallin muttered during a tense council meeting, fingers drumming the polished wood. "The risk is too great." Caven's amber eyes flickered, cold and steel-edged. The room thickened with tension as his voice, deep and commanding, filled the chamber. "Iria is no threat but the promise of our survival. Beneath the ice, she carries the warmth we've needed for too long. The pack has chosen and I have chosen. Let no man mistake that for weakness." Yet, one by one, whispers gathered strength. Shadows lengthened. The pack stirred uneasily, the old loyalties and traditions challenged by the fierce truth of a new queen. But then something unexpected happened. The wolves rose, not in rebellion, but in defense. The fierce hearts of Caven's pack howled for Iria, a chorus of allegiance echoing through snowy forests and icy halls alike. The oldest and fiercest of the pack, once wary and cold, bowed their heads in acceptance. The younger wolves, outsiders and born under the wolf's moon, leaned closer to Iria's side, their loyalty unquestioned. To them, she was survival, she was warm, and where Caven's wolf roared, theirs echoed back in unyielding support. It was during this surge of unwavering devotion that a revelation cut through them all, jagged and raw. In the depths of the fortress crypt, amidst relics and faded banners, Caven found the truth long buried beneath dust and shadows. There were no mistakes in bloodlines, no accidental losses. His forsaken queen, his heart's ache and ghost, was not gone, but was Iria's grandmother. The betrayal that had ripped the lineage apart was not only political, but deeply personal. Iria's grandmother had been his first mate before a coup shattered their world, forcing him to sever bonds that now burned through these halls like wildfire. A fragile silence hung over Caven as the weight of this tangled past pressed against him. His amber gaze met hers one cold evening, beneath frost-laced banners that fluttered like ghosts in the wind. "Aria," he whispered, voice thick with pain and hope, "the blood that flows through you is the blood I once pledged my life to protect. The wounds we carry are the same, the scars of betrayal, fear, and a desperate hope that something better can grow from the ruin." Iria's ice-grey eyes shimmered, not with tears, but unyielding fire. "Then we are bound by more than fate. We are bound by history that demands we rise, not fall, together." In the stillness of that revelation, walls came crashing down between two scarred souls. Their shared past, twisted and bitter, was no longer a chain but a bridge. A fragile one, yes, but one built on truth and the fierce refusal to be broken once more. Months of tension bled into the long nights, and when silence reigned over the pack and their fortress alike, Caven led Iria away from the ruthless court to a world untouched by politics and power. Beneath the spectacular swirling curtains of the northern lights, an ethereal green and violet glow draped over the frozen expanse. The scent of pine and ice filled the air, crisp and clean as their breaths danced.